And I call this meeting to order. Would you please stand for the pledge of allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. Dan, roll call.
Greenberg.
Here.
Hicks.
Here.
Mako.
Here.
Shapaka.
Here.
Siriano.
Here.
Tamarkin is absent. Wester.
Here.
Thank you. Do we have any additions or corrections to the agenda?
No, sir.
We have the approval of the meeting minutes. The meetings went out. Is any motion?
Mr. Chair, I move the approval of the minutes of the August 9th meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Is there a second?
Second, Mako.
We have a motion made by Mr. Hicks and seconded by Mr. Mako. Is there any discussion on the Planning Commission meeting minutes? Hearing none. Pam, roll call?
Hicks.
Yes.
Mako.
Yes.
Shapaka.
Yes.
Siriano.
Yes.
Wester.
Abstain.
Greenberg.
Yes.
Motion passes. We now turn this over to the city attorney to swear in any of the applicants or speakers tonight. Mr. Roth?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are now at the public hearing portion of the meeting. The public hearing will operate as follows. Administrative staff will make a presentation or comment on the application. The applicant or their representative may then make a presentation or comment on the application. Public comment will then be open for 3 minutes allowed per speaker. Additional time may be requested. Permission is at the discretion of the chair. Speakers must complete a speaker slip and come to the podium and state their name. The applicant will then be given 10 minutes to comment. Additional time may be requested. Permission is at the discretion of the chair. If there is more than one application pending for a particular address, the presentation on each application may be consolidated and presented as one. At this time, will persons wishing to present testimony this evening please rise and raise your right hand to be sworn in? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If so, state I do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. We now enter the application portion of our meeting. We have 3 items on the agenda tonight. I will read each issue in its entirety before we proceed. The first one is a variance application. Variance application number V00192023 to consider a variance application to vary chapters 1143.08C, side yard setback of the codified ordinances of the city of Gahanna, to allow for a garage installation on the property located at 150 Regal Place, parcel ID number 025-003475, current zoning SF3, Tracy Parks applicant. We will turn this over to Maddie for explanation of the variance.
The first application for tonight is a variance request at 150 Regal Place. The site is zoned SF3, which is one of our single-family residential districts. And as shown on the map here, all of the adjacent sites share the same zoning. The applicant is requesting approval of a variance to allow a 16 by 24-foot attached garage to encroach 3.5 feet into a 7.5-foot side yard setback. This side yard setback is consistent for all sites that are zoned SF3. The applicant originally applied for a building permit for a garage in June. At that time, the garage was compliant with the zoning code and was located outside of all setbacks. The applicant states that their initial calculations were incorrect, and the garage is actually 11 feet closer to the side property line than what was originally approved, which is why they applied for a variance. The proposed garage will be located at the end of the existing driveway and will be attached to the north side of the home. Here are the existing conditions for the site. As you can see, it's a single-family house that currently has no carport or garage, just a driveway. And the adjacent site to the north, which you can kind of see on the left-hand side of the photo, has a carport, and that's what's located closest to this site. Here is a drawing that was submitted by the applicant that shows that the proposed garage will match the existing structure in height and will match the existing roof line as well. Here is a site plan that was submitted by the applicant. The proposed garage addition is shown in red. It's 16 feet wide and 24 feet deep and is located 4 feet from the north property line. The yellow line on the site plan shows the approximate location of the 7.5-foot side yard setback. Here is the variance criteria. Planning Commission must show that all 3 criteria are met in order to approve the variance. The first is that there are special circumstances or conditions that apply to the land, building, or use. The second is that the granting of the variance is necessary for the preservation and enjoyment of substantial property rights. And the third is that the granting of the application will not be materially detrimental to public welfare or injurious to property or improvements in such neighborhood. The applicant states that this location for the garage was chosen so it could be constructed on top of the existing driveway and attached to the northern side of the house. All other properties except for one on Regal Place have either garages or carports, so the addition is compatible with the surrounding area. Additionally, previous variance applications for additions within the side yard setback in the SF3 district have been approved within the past 3 years. Both were approximately 5 feet from the property line, which is around what this variance request is for as well. So that's all I have, so I turn things back over to the commission.
Thank you, Maddie. We will now open the public portion for comment. Is there any speakers, anybody who signed to speak? No? Would the applicant like to respond?
I am here.
Please come up to the microphone and state your name and address.
Good evening. I'm Tracy Parks from Franklin Garage Builders, and we are from Ashley, Ohio, and representing the homeowner tonight. What I wanted to share with you is that we thought that this garage for this homeowner would greatly improve the property value, her security, and for storage. And we built a phenomenal product. It'll match the home with siding and shingles and those kind of things. And I'm here to answer any other questions that you might have.
Thank you. No other comment? Nobody called in?
No, sir.
No? So we close the public portion. We open the floor for questions from the commission. Starting on my left. Ms. Wester?
No questions.
Always a good sign.
No questions for me.
I have one question for the owner, or if you can answer. The neighbor adjacent to the left, was there a discussion with them, whether it was were they in favor of the construction?
There was a discussion, sir, and they had no problems with building a garage there. It was requested that we make the garage wall closest to their property, a fire-rated wall, and we've included that in our plans.
Good. Hearing no other questions? Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve agenda item V-0019-2023.
Thank you, Mr. Soriano. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. We have a motion by Mr. Soriano and seconded by Mr. Greenberg. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Pam, roll call.
Siriano,
Yes.
Greenberg,
Yes.
Mako,
Yes.
Chapaca,
Yes.
Wester,
Yes.
Hicks.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Our second item on the agenda is a design review application, number DR 0017 2023 to consider a design review application for a master sign plan for property located at 680 Buckles Court, Crescent at Central Park, parcel ID 025-013-811, current zoning SCPD, Gahanna Medical Office Building. Sean Alley, applicant. And I turn this over to Maddie Administration for a presentation.
The second application before you tonight is for a master sign plan at 680 Buckles Court North, which is Lot 2 of the Crescent at Central Park development. The site is zoned Select Commercial Plan District, and it is located adjacent to I-270. The applicant is requesting approval of a master sign plan. The project had final development plan, design review, and variance applications approved in 2022. While signage was shown on these plans, it was not under the purview of Planning Commission at the time, and the signage shown was just preliminary. The site contains one 2-story multi-tenant medical office building with 5 tenant spaces. And while the zoning code was revised a couple of months ago with specific sign standards for multi-tenant developments with no master sign plan, the applicant is still requesting a master sign plan to allow for larger signage than what is permitted in code. The master sign plan includes 9 wall signs and 1 ground sign. 4 of the tenant spaces will have 2 wall signs each, 4 of which are along the rear of the building adjacent to I-270, the other 4 which are at the front of the building. The final wall sign is located on the southernmost side of the building. Here are the previously approved renderings for reference. As mentioned, the signage shown on these are preliminary, but they are around the same size as what is proposed today. Here are some highlights of the master sign plan, some of which I'll go into more detail. The maximum wall sign length is 20 feet for 7 of the 9 wall signs, and then 28 feet for the remaining 2. The maximum wall sign height is between 4 and 7 feet. The ground sign is 9 feet 4 inches tall, which includes the masonry foundation. The sign contains 5 double-sided sign cabinets, 1 per tenant, and the total sign area, not including the base or structural elements of the sign, is 40.44 square feet. Tenants are not restricted in font, design, logos, or colors, which is standard in previously approved MSPs. The landlord approval is required prior to applying for a sign permit, and applicants must prove that they have landlord approval when they apply. Prohibited sign types for the MSP include box/cabinet signs, cloth, paper, cardboard, or vinyl signs, moving or rotating signs, signs painted directly on building surface, and window signage. Here is a chart that compares code requirements with the requirements that are outlined in the MSP. For wall signage, these are the requirements for multi-tenant developments. The maximum length in code is 50% of storefront width. In the MSP, it's 20 to 28 feet based on the tenant space. Maximum height is 30 inches. It's 4 to 7 feet based on tenant space in the MSP. And then for multi-tenant developments, each tenant is permitted multiple signs as long as the combined length and height of the signs do not exceed the above requirements. And then the maximum square footage in the MSP is 100 to 140 square feet. For monument signage, these are the standard regulations for commercial sites, which this property does fall under. The maximum height is 8 feet, and the MSP maximum height is 9 feet 4 inches. The maximum area is 80 square feet, and the ground sign in the MSP does fall within this requirement. And then it also meets the minimum setback requirement of 15 feet from the right-of-way. And as mentioned, there are 5 total sign cabinets. These are the proposed elevations for the MSP signs. The elevation that's facing the southwest is the front of the building that is adjacent to Buckles Court. The elevation facing northeast is adjacent to I-270. Here is one more elevation. This is for the one tenant that would only have 1 wall sign. And then on the right is the proposed ground sign. This is a site plan that was provided by the applicant. Signs A through D are along Buckles Court North, and signs E through H are along I-270. And then the ground sign is located in the bottom right-hand corner of the site plan. And as mentioned, it is located 16 feet from the right-of-way. Here's the evaluation criteria for master sign plans. And staff recommends approval of the master sign plan as submitted. It meets all applicable code requirements and encourages consistent signage. And the wall signage, while large, is in scale with the building size. The ground sign only exceeds maximum height by 16 inches and meets all other applicable requirements. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Patty. We now open the public portion. Would the applicant like to make a comment about the presentation?
Good evening, Larry Canini Associates, along with Todd Kimling from Noon Development. Todd made the trip up from Chattanooga. We're just here to answer any questions. I think it was pretty self-explanatory. Thank you for the photos and the description. As we've talked before with these projects, when we've been here for FDPs and such, our goal has been all along to have the doctors become a part of the project, so they are owners within the project. So that's critical in keeping them beyond the tax abatement and all the other things that can occur that cause practices to leave. So we're excited to have the building completely occupied and full as we go to move, I think, first tenants in about 30 to 45 days. So just excited to have this first one with multi-tenants. And this signage is critical to them, as you know, very important to the doctors in the visibility. And obviously, they paid a premium to be along I-270. And so that premium provides them, we hope, the opportunity to have this bit of marketing from the signage on multiple sides, specifically I-270. So any questions, Todd and I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Larry. Did you state your address?
Oh, what is my address? My address,
Where you
P.O.
at?
Box 887, New Albany, Ohio is my office, 5071 Forest Drive in New Albany, Ohio. I'm sorry.
Thanks for putting that in the record, Larry.
Yeah, I apologize.
Was there any calls or questions from the public or any notes?
No, sir.
Now close the public portion and open up the questions from the commission.
No question.
Yes, Ms. Wester.
In the elevations on, for D, elevation facing southwest, and on H, elevation facing northeast, you call for 120 square feet, but the numbers down below, 28 by 4,
Add
come
up
out to
differently.
112.
Probably an error. We'll have to ask the sign, our sign manufacturer put all that together for us, Tom, so we will have to look into that. Do you have anything other than what was submitted with you, Todd?
D,
H and D. Okay. It appears that they are listing as the square footage as the maximum allowed, but our measurements are just coming in under that. So I think that's what our sign company was showing was the maximum allowed. So those dimensions just bring it a bit under the max from what we're seeing on our handout copy from the sign company.
So Tom, when that tenant actually submits for permit, their sign will be 112, but as a sign package, if that tenant were ever to leave, it's just provided that they are no larger than 120.
okay, could you speak into the mic so that we'd get a tape of that?
Need your name?
Yes, Todd Kimling of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And the tenant, when they submit, it will be the 112 square feet, although the elevation has a maximum of 120 square feet. So that's, the package is just a lot for what a maximum square footage would be. But when they actually go to submit, it'll be lower than that. So it would be within the hopefully approved allowance.
Is that a problem, Maddie?
No, it is not. Although I think that in general, if I were to receive a sign permit for this tenant space, I would only allow 112 square feet based on what is in the MSP. So, I mean, it could be revised to change that to 112, but I don't think it would cause any permitting issues.
Thank you.
You, Ms. Wester? Mr. Mako?
Yep, one quick question. In the presentation, when the slides, it said landlord approval required prior to applying for a sign permit. Could you kind of just walk through what that process would look like when, practice is coming in and they're looking for a landlord approval, just in general?
Yeah, I mean, here the situation is because all of the practices are in essence partners in the real estate. Todd's company serves as a partner as well as the landlord, as well as the property manager in a sense. So they've already blessed
And we
all
would-
of the
We can
applicants.
provide a letter with that permit
Yeah.
application from the landlord
Yeah,
on each individual package.
Okay.
with the signed permit application.
Okay. And again, just out of curiosity, I was just curious about just what that process would look like. And would I be correct to assume that when you go through that exercise, that the city's standards are going to be notated somewhere in that process?
Yes.
Okay.
And again, as you can see with this packet, it's all about, in today's age, it's all about branding, and colors and specific fonts and all that. So, we're dealing with a lot of that, not only in the retail side, but now we're seeing it in the medical community as well, so.
Sure. It's a business. It's a
Big
business.
business. Right?
No other questions?
Thanks, Ms. Mako. Mr. Greenberg? Mr. Gahanna?
Mr. Kennedy, I don't know if this is in our purview tonight, but do you know, can you tell us if are the signs internally lit? Are they lit at all?
Backlit, correct? Yeah, backlit.
Internally LED lit.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And the monument sign, is it like ground lit or the same, or internally? Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Larry, so when you were in here prior and we were looking at the site in general, is there a lollipop pole, a sign with all the tenants on them along the highway? Are you replacing that? You had a concept where you had one sign, they had multiple names on it, and we were looking at that somewhere in history.
You're speaking of along the freeway visibility? No, the only thing we touched on when I was here for the preliminary plat for Buckles Court was, and it still remains, there is a 20-foot strip of land between what is Lot 1A and this particular lot. That 20-foot strip is being held for the purpose of us returning to you in the near future here, very near future, to propose relocating the paper billboard that is along Hamilton Road at Tech Center Drive. There are 2 Lamar billboards that are static, paper billboards. If you go by the site literally now, we have started excavation and the fill work for that project. One of those billboards now falls within one of our retention basins that has begun to get carved in, and the other one's just a little further north, almost to the ramp. We are removing those billboards from that site. One of those billboards will move, we're going to propose one of those billboards be moved to this 20-foot strip I spoke of along I-270. We have a meeting actually with Michael on Tuesday, Michael? Monday or Tuesday? Yeah, to sit down with the Lamar representative and begin to put our packet together for that application to you. So that will be a digital billboard, and it will appear exactly like the one Lamar now has at the end of Claycraft Road in Morrison. You can now see from the freeway on the east side of the freeway at Claycraft. So that's where we will be working with you and presenting to you that here in the near future.
Thanks for the clarification on that.
Yep,
I
thank
thought we
you.
were duplicating signs here for a minute.
No, that's the game plan there. That's the game plan there.
Very good. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move the approval of item DR-0017-2023.
Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Is there a second?
Second, Wester.
Thank you, Mr. Wester. We have a motion by Mr. Hicks and seconded by Mr. Wester. Is there any discussion on the design review application? Hearing no other further discussion. Pam, roll call?
Hicks,
Yes.
Wester,
Yes.
Greenberg,
Yes.
Mako,
Yes.
Chapaca,
Yes.
Siriano.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thanks for bringing this before us. Our last item on the agenda is a design review application for a carport. Number DR-0018-2023, to consider a design review application for a carport for property located at Buckles Court North, parcel ID 025-013-811, current zoning SCPD, Crescent at Central Park, Lot 2, Bob Elliott applicant. Turn it over to Maddie for the administration presentation.
This application is located on the same site as the previous application. The applicant is requesting approval of a design review for a 20-foot by 60-foot non-enclosed carport covering 6 existing parking spaces. So no parking spaces are being removed or added as part of this application, so all parking requirements are still met. The carport is located on the south side of the property adjacent to Reserve C. Reserve C is a wooded area that will remain undeveloped. A variance was granted in 2022 for a 0-foot setback along the southern property line. So although the carport is along that property line, no additional variance is necessary for this application. As stated on the materials list from the applicant, the primary color is matte black to match the existing medical building. Here is a site plan that was provided by the applicant. The carport is located in the upper right-hand corner of the site plan, and Reserve C, as mentioned, is just to the right of the carport, and it's located approximately 180 feet from the right-of-way. Here is an example image that was submitted by the applicant showing what the carport could look like. Here is the criteria for the design review. There's the standard design review criteria, and then the site is a part of Design Review District 3, which does have some separate criteria, and there is only one criteria from that applied to this application, which was that color scheme should be designed to ensure universal harmony on all commercial developments. Staff recommends approval of this application. The request is minor, and the color of the carport is consistent with the main building. As mentioned, the carport is approximately 108 feet from the right-of-way, and all other applicable code requirements are met.
Thank you, Maddie. Is the applicant here to make a comment? This is Todd again.
Todd Kimling of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Your address?
Yes, 715 Market, Chattanooga, Tennessee, 37402.
Thank you, Todd. Is there anybody from the public reach out, had any kind of comments?
No, sir.
Hearing none, we will open up for questions from the commission. Mr. Weston? Mr. Mako?
Just a real quick general question. Is this being done just as an amenity to the site? Is that the rationale for including this?
It is. It's since it's a medical office and this has a surgery center component, it's for the physicians that are also owners in the building to have that carport.
And is this pretty standard in other developments that you've done?
It is, especially for medical that also have that surgery center component.
Okay, thank you. No other questions?
Mr. Greenberg?
No questions.
Mr. Sariano?
Are there any, I'm assuming it's just painted steel? Is that correct?
It is, and the photo, although that was just a standard photo from the manufacturer, it
Yeah.
would be black to match the theme of the building.
Okay, got it. Thank you. That's all.
Is there, I got a question for administration. If they came back and wanted to put photo cells on top of this thing or solar panels, does that have to come back, get a permit for that?
I know they'd need a building permit for solar panels. Just a building permit.
Just a building permit? And if there was a, kind of a car charger station, that would be also a building permit too? It would not come before us?
Probably, definitely a building permit for some electrical, but I don't know if those spaces, I don't think they're typically any larger. If they were larger to change the parking lot layout, technically what the code says is that would have to come before you. But if it's just putting a charger and they're not losing any spaces, then it would just be an administrative permitting process.
All right, thank you. It's just a little bit of information, Todd. Hearing no other more questions, Pam, roll call? I'm sorry. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve application DR-0018-2023.
Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. Is there a second?
Second, Soriano?
Thank you, Mr. Soriano. We have a motion by Mr. Greenberg and seconded by Mr. Soriano. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Pam, now official roll call.
Greenberg,
Yes.
Siriano,
Yes.
Chapaca,
Yes.
Wester,
Yes.
Hicks,
Yes.
Mako.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thanks for bringing it before us. That finishes our applications. We move on to unfinished business. Do we have any? None. Is there any new business? And that would be, the notes here has rewrite with Director Blackford.
Thank you, Planning Commission. It's been a while since I've been before you to talk about the zoning code. And so tonight, since we were meeting and we had a relatively light agenda, we wanted to take this opportunity to discuss a few items, give a quick update of where we're at. We actually do finally have some public participation, new public participation scheduled. Looks like we'll be at the, I think it's called the Mill Street Market, September 24th, the flea market out there. We're planning on being out there, having some public participation boards to talk about the zoning code rewrite. After that, we'll collect that data, anticipating probably like in October or November, probably October, a joint sort of more in-depth workshop with Planning Commission and City Council. That agenda is not finalized by any stretch, but what I imagine those main topics that we'll try to cover would be uses. That's a big, important topic here in the city, and I think more so now than ever when you have a community that's largely, vacant land is running short, and infill development really puts a premium on smart redevelopment. So I think uses, maybe some architectural discussions and signage as well is kind of what we're anticipating for that Planning Commission, City Council discussion. But again, that's not etched in stone. But tonight, I'd like, while we're staff here, Logan and Maddie and myself, we're working on some edits to the draft of zoning code, and we really want to take an opportunity to make sure that we're maybe headed in the right direction on just 2 or 3 topics. So one of those topics tonight, and tonight's agenda is probably a good one to bring up because our last item was a carport. Some of these changes that, again, are technically our code says you're changing around your site plan, even if you're not expanding your parking area, but you're just changing how you're striping, and that technically that has to come before Planning Commission. So one of the questions we had tonight was, and we've talked about this a little bit in the past, is what's the appetite for some administrative approval? So what we're kind of thinking here is, well, one of the things we see is that final development plans and design review applications, kind of the 2 main applications we see that approve development, really have like the same materials and that. So kind of combining those applications just to make it a little bit more simplified. But then really having two different permitting paths, a planning commission permitting path and then an administrative permitting path. We've talked about that a little bit. We made some of those code changes already with like subdivision without plats being administrative instead of always coming before planning commission. And just wanted to get an idea again if we're kind of on the right track here. And what we were thinking is for some administrative approvals, again, like we just talked about carports, is carports, and I think maybe in a future agenda we might have like a pavilion or something like that. You know, structures, accessory structures, or maybe small building additions are those things that we think in theory possibly with the right code language could be administratively approvable. You know, a lot of zoning code is subjective as to how we come to a determination, and we were thinking maybe like, again, modest additions like 5,000 square feet or less. We had it was like 2 or 3 years ago, we had a whole bunch of small building additions in our industrial area, and you know, we got through them in 5-10 minutes with little concern. So is that something that we think, again, just high level, I'm not gonna, you know, remember this day and say you said it was okay or anything. But again, is this something that, you know, we were thinking maybe like lighting standards, if you meet our lighting standards, if you meet our landscaping standards, if it's like a pavilion or a carport, or you're changing around your parking lot, the parking space orientation, you know, are those things that we think would be appropriate to be an administrative approval process in the future?
So, Mr. Blackford,
Yeah,
you're kind of referring to administrative approval in the instance that an application would meet zoning code, correct?
Yes,
Not
only
not
when
a
it meets,
variance.
only when it meets zoning code. So if there was any variance because of the parking space sizes were too small, then that variance would be before you, just like you see with signage. You're not approving the sign necessarily, but you're approving that deviation from code. So those instances, and yes, forgive me, I meant to mention that here in my notes, was to clarify that, yes, it would be for cases that meet code, our new code standards. If they meet that, that could be approved by staff rather than going through an a public hearing process. Yes, sir. Yes.
And
Anyone.
you're going to have some size, you know, standards for like a carport, can't be over the whole parking lot.
Absolutely, and that's what, if we're thinking that, you know, in theory, these are appropriate, we'd be working on some language and then covering that language in detail, because that's a major change to how we process things. And at this point, I don't know how much process-wise is really going to change in the code. This might be it, or the main component, but we would do a deep dive and kind of do a little bit of a, maybe like Maddie just did with the master sign plan, a little bit of a comparison of proposed versus existing and seeing if that's okay. Like I said, the challenges with the square footage is that technically a carport or pavilion is a structure and not a building, so there isn't technically a square footage, but there could be placement criteria associated with that, like it's to the rear of the main building, or it's to the rear of the main building, something like that. We could have placement criteria to say if you meet these, again, and that might be a good way to encourage folks to place these things in areas that are more shielded from the public view. So it's sort of that carrot or stick approach. You do this, you get the administrative approval. You want to deviate, it requires a public hearing.
Michael, would there be provisions in the code? I'm just like thinking through a couple. So would there be provisions in the instance where, you know, we try to dot all the I's, cross all the T's, or invariably you can't think of every instance, right? So
Exactly.
restriping, buildings that are less than 5,000 square feet, buildings that are, or accessory structures that are less than 5,000 square feet, a certain height. Invariably, there may be something that falls in that criteria that would technically meet zoning code, but maybe administration might have, their ears might perk up like, hey, this is something adjacent to X use, you know? Would there be any provisions, or I guess my suggestion would be, make some provisions in the code that would enable administration to escalate it to planning commission in the instance where there would be some, I don't know how you'd word it, but I would ask maybe Mr. Roth if like that, if there would be some verbiage that could be included that gives administration the flexibility to escalate it if it needed to be. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it does, and we can certainly do that. We do have that language, and it's probably really old language, so it might need to be kind of modernized or rethought, but we have it in a few areas for applications that really I don't ever see, and Planning Commission doesn't, like a home occupation or something like that. I think is like administratively approvable, but if we get a
Right.
concern, yeah, administration can take it forward. So that's great. We can do some research on maybe trying to find some good code language to make sure it's legally sufficient, but to have that that safety valve there to bring things forward.
I mean, I
Absolutely do
personally,
that.
I don't have any issue with like restriping or things like that. They seem like that's, should be pretty readily approvable.
And again, we could have, if we want placement, or if we want, like tonight, where it's the carport, if it's as determined by staff, a similar material and color, where, if they want to make it all orange or something, well, wait a second, now that's a little bit different, and that. So we can definitely, like you said, and I'm familiar, not with Gahanna's code, but previous codes, where no matter how exhaustive that list is, it can't encompass every single scenario. So we'll work on some language, and maybe our next meeting, if it's not too long, we can have a follow-up discussion and maybe put something up there to kind of bounce it off you, if that sounds okay.
So I have a,
Hold on, it's coming down the line here. So, what we're doing here is we're letting the public aware of an issue and giving them an opportunity to make a comment. So when we administratively approve things, they lose that ability to voice their opinion.
Sure, right.
So we're limiting what they are viewing. So all these little things and all the other administrative stuff, it seems like a nice and good procedure. When does it become a point to where it might be a public concern? How does the public know, hey, my neighbor's building something, it looks like it got through, I gotta voice my opinion about it? Would that trigger something in your verbiage that would have to come before a public hearing?
No, I don't think that's a good question, but I would say that where my thoughts go on that is that, well, one, a couple of things. It's only the planning process that requires public hearings. So engineering processes, building permit processes are all administrative. Not that that's good or bad, but that's just, again, there's three processes that folks have to go through, generally speaking, to get approvals and do construction, and that this is the public hearing process. I think where Gahanna is at, hopefully within a few months, is that we have a relatively new land use plan, and we have a brand new zoning code that encompasses the direction that the community wants to go. And I believe that when you have legal documents that are reflective of the community desires, why are you taking things to hearing if they meet the code? So really, in my opinion, is it's variances, conditional uses, rezonings. When you're asking for something that isn't allowed, that really is the public hearing participation. Because quite frankly, I don't want to speak for Matt, but I will, and that's when something meets code, you can't really deny it. And so when we see final development plans, if there's no variances attached to it, and something meets code, it becomes a very sticky wicket if you want to say no to those things. So
the public awareness of what the code actually says and get educated on that is pretty much their first line of defense.
Absolutely. And I would say we have, to my knowledge, the city's never rewritten the zoning code. It's always been amendments, like you've seen me take before you time and time again. Public participation, we had, I think, 3 or 4 public meetings with the land use plan. We've had online engagement for the zoning code. I think this is like the 3rd or 4th time I've been in front of Planning Commission to talk to the zoning code. We'll have, multiple public hearings and public participation. Probably more online engagement. So all those will help shape the direction of the code and that. And again, I think staff's viewpoint is, again, if you're meeting code, and a lot of times, like the parking lot example is a good one where, again, they're just restriping and changing the orientation of that. What's the benefit of going through a public hearing process for that. But I don't think what we want to do, I think what we also need to be careful of is, again, weighing what is appropriate development to be administrative approvals and what's not. And what we don't want to do is go from 0 to 60 and try to say, well, you know, now there's no public hearings or anything like that. It's just sort of, you know, some of the more minor ones like we saw tonight where typically there isn't a whole bunch of public involvement and participation in that.
Very fair. Thought out. Thank you, Michael. James?
So I comment then a question. The comment is, I'm glad that we're having this discussion. I just read in the dispatch that it's taken City of Columbus 70 years to update their zoning code, so I'm glad we haven't waited that long to look at this. So this is a good discussion in my mind. I guess another comment that just, you know, from my day job and my past experience, I think doing things administratively expedites processes. You know, we always hear complaints from the public that it's government, it just takes so slow. And if, again, I mean, if someone is coming in with a application and it meets code, I think it makes all the sense in the world to review things administratively. But that being said, I guess the question to you as, you know, Director of Planning, do you think this is going to cause an undue burden to you and your staff if we kind of go in this direction? And I know, you know, my crystal ball's been broken for 52 years now, so it might be kind of hard to say what's going to be the future. But do you think that if we go this direction, it's going to burden you and your staff?
I appreciate the comments and the question, and I would say because of some of the points you just brought up, it would actually make it easier for staff because we're really doing the same review that we would be doing now. But like I said, a lot of it isn't so much the public hearing and what's coming on tonight, but the amount of time it takes to write a staff report, prepare a presentation, and a lot of it's the back and forth between maybe someone with like you said, like wanting expedited timelines and concern about scheduling for hearings, and that which really creates a lot of back and forth between various staff members and the applicant in that. And so I think it's important that again, we make sure that new development, new buildings, that's more impactful. Those still go through the public hearing process. But when it's the more minor things, if we can get to that point of what's minor, I think it would save staff time and energy, and I think it would mean a tremendous amount to the community, the business community, the developers. That's one of the most important factors. That's a question we get more than anything, is how long it's going to take. And then a lot of it is took me all this time, and you guys are very efficient, which we greatly appreciate, and everyone involved in. But sometimes it's sort of like, well, it took me 3 months and it took 10 minutes, kind of deal. And it's like, well, would you rather have taken 3 months and you got denied in 3 hours? I mean, it's a great outcome. Everyone's happy, but it's sort of like, is there any way to compress those? And as I'm sure, some of you may be aware, all the national trends, MORPC, all the kind of stuff that they're putting out there and what they're shooting for, again, is zonings need to be more permissible, and there needs to be more administrative processes. That's what they're all encouraging. That's the way the world's going, to try to get things, and again, each community is a little bit different, but again, making things a little bit more administrative, not always requiring a public hearing. That doesn't mean it's right for us. That's why we're having the discussion.
All right, thank you.
I want to have a follow-up question. So I just did a patio for Consuelos down on the campus, and I made an application, and they bounced around a little bit, and I was just like, man, we're just adding some railing to this. Can't you do this administratively? And they got together 2 weeks prior, and it seemed like the commission got together and passed it. So they came to an agreement. So I mean, if we don't do this, or if there's a level that it comes in, I'm just looking for accountability. If that could be sent to us and we can just review it real fast and say, yeah, there's no issue with this at all, do it administratively. Is there a level in that flow chart for that possibility of bouncing it off of us just through the internet prior to just being another level before you make the call.
Are you saying like the applications would be, I guess, presented informally to planning commission? They would say, yeah, we want to hear that one, or no, go ahead and do it administratively?
Yes. And I don't know if there was
Like
a fee associated with
Permissive
that,
appeal type thing.
because it was more of a, hey, there's a timeline crunch here, but hey, if you want to expedite this, we can try to hand this by emailing it out. If nobody has a problem with it on the commission, then we might be able to do it administratively. It seemed like that was a possibility. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus for the university area, but it was odd that it was not approved, and then all of a sudden, it was there.
Yeah, I'm not aware of, I haven't had any experience with situations like that, and I don't know if that would even be something you could do, because wouldn't you then be outside of a meeting, making comments and sort of impromptu votes on a request, which I don't know if you can do
You're
outside of a
saying they'd be
formal.
making decisions outside of a public hearing. If we
That's
say
what
that, yeah, they'd be saying, yeah, we're okay with this, no, we're not okay with that one, set, put it on the agenda.
I don't know if you could, but we can look into that, see if we can find some examples of some communities that, maybe have that a little bit more, because sometimes that might be maybe a little bit of an informal way of processing things. See if that's formalized. We could probably take a look and see if we could find something.
It might have been, just looking at it, they might have made the wrong call up front and put me on a delay, and then realized their error, and then came back to me and said, yes, we can do this.
That does happen, on occasion with us, and I could see that when I was just talking about kind of having that different permitting path with some variables. I'm sure that's going to happen at some point. Someone's going to think it's going to be an administrative process, but your building's too big, or now you need a variance, so this would go to hearing.
Well, if we had 35 items to go over tonight, I'm
Yeah.
sure we might structure it differently, where we
That's
would
true.
have
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, we don't have agendas like that, like I'm sure some other places do, so fortunate
Thank you,
for
Mike.
them.
Mr. Weston? Oh, man. Mr. Hicks?
Yeah, thank you. So I wouldn't be in favor of a pre-approval. Either we do or we don't. And the planning department doesn't report to us, so they don't, either they send it to us or they don't. So I guess I wouldn't be in favor of that component. If you look at our charter, about what the powers of the planning commission are, it's pretty vague, but it does use phrases like buildings or other structures. So if we're able to further define that or clarify it in code, I think that would be helpful. I'm in favor of the principle of what's being discussed here. So if we can make the process more efficient for a homeowner or a developer, I'm definitely in favor of that, and would like to hear more and learn more and move forward with it.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate that, everyone. Thank you very much.
Nothing? All right, thank you.
One other topic, and maybe we'll just end after this next topic here. Parking. So want to get a little bit of thoughts on parking. And so traditionally, zoning codes have minimum parking requirements. Our code does. And it's done on a very general basis. You can't do it based on tenants. Tenants change. So it's done on a use. And a good example is, a lot of zoning codes will say, okay, if you're a big box retailer, you've got to have, one space per, 200 square feet or whatever it is. It doesn't matter if you're Kmart or Costco. You still have to have all that parking. And as we know, the parking needs of a Kmart and Costco are very different. So again, a lot of zoning codes that are being rewritten are taking different approaches to parking. A lot of the more modern codes, sometimes they don't have any maximum. They'll have, any minimum parking requirements. They may have maximum parking requirements, or they might just leave it up to the developer to determine what's the appropriate amount of parking. I would say that our consultant who does this on a regular basis, they're proposing to have no parking requirements, no minimum parking requirements for commercial development. For residential, there would be, but for commercial, there wouldn't be. Now, that would be a big departure from how we do things currently. If that's not something that we think might be appropriate in Gahanna, then we can work on some alterations to the code. We did a little bit of research. Last 4.5 years, we've had 10 parking reduction variances. They've all been approved. I think the vast majority of those have been in our industrial area, not so much in our commercial area, but then again, we don't get a lot of commercial. It's all office, medical office, or industrial or multifamily. So some of those would have been multifamily and industrial, I think were the two there, the main uses. Maybe we need to look at it and reduce our parking requirements. Do we think it's appropriate to, I'm a little concerned about, I'll be honest, with going with no parking limits because you take, recently there was the High Bank Distillery. That particular shopping center, I haven't been here as long in the community as some people, but I've been here almost a decade, and I probably never have seen that facility more than half full. Once they came on board, then all of a sudden I had at least half a dozen people asking if they had enough parking, which from a zoning code standpoint, they did. They had more than enough. But again, zoning codes aren't really good at predicting how much parking you need. And what we don't want to have is, like Stone Ridge has like 1,500 parking spaces. It's very popular, but I don't think there's ever been anywhere close to that many cars. We don't want to see large parking areas that are sitting empty, like maybe the shopping center across the street from us, especially when we're looking at a lot of infill development. Really need to be smart with maximizing the potential of those sites. I kind of think personally it might be too much of a stretch to go down to 0 parking requirements in commercial. We could always keep the standards we have. Maddie and Logan have done some research, and there's lots of codes out there that allow for administrative deviations when the tenant or the developer has been able to provide some sort of, I think they call it like a market analysis, how they're used. I think we hear it for the apartment users. Hey, a suburban code, 2 parking spaces per unit, that's a lot. We've operated 20 of these sites and we find that 1.5 spaces is sufficient. Would we feel that it could possibly be appropriate to allow, again, maybe some administrative flexibility on parking, just parking, if applicants, developers were able to provide with that site plan, that application, some analysis as to why they would be allowed to have a parking reduction. It would save them a variance, which anything we do to kind of eliminate variables, uncertainty is something that's very important to site selectors, to these folks. So again, the more barriers and kind of unknowns we can eliminate, even if it's small ones like, just eliminating 1 parking variance, that does help, Gahanna recruiting certain businesses and that.
I just wanted to note, so Michael, so I know specifically if you're working in downtown Columbus, there's no parking requirement, right? And so we do a lot of high density buildings in downtown Columbus. So that is it's good. I've built buildings with no parking, appended parking, but invariably the rationale is we're looking, it has high walkability, and different options for transit, things like that, or proximity to structured parking where you can connect to it, whatever that is. But I've never had a project that didn't have parking as a thing, just our culture. So where someone that maybe in New York or super high density urban spaces, you can get by without a car, right? So Gahanna, Columbus in general, and I would say that even for someone living downtown, we're still a car-based culture. So I would support certainly a reduction in in our zone. I think our zoning requirements for parking are way too high. I mean, we see typically, like you were mentioning, 1.5 spaces per unit on a residential. You might see 3 per 1,000 for office. You might see 3 per 1,000 square feet for office. You might see, sometimes we shoot for 1-to-1 in high density areas. So I would definitely support a reduction in parking from a zoning perspective. I think no parking requirement might be setting us up for, some craziness like you were mentioning.
Yeah, and that's where with like the Hag Bank example, I wouldn't have a good response as to,
Yeah.
why maybe there's an issue in that. So, I mean, I have some of the same concerns, and like you said, it's, Columbus is very different than Gahanna. But
Yeah.
again, just what level of flexibility, and again, we can propose something, get it in front of you maybe at the next meeting, just to bounce it off you, just to see if we think, like this might be decent language. Again, if this is something that we even want to entertain, if we don't, that's perfectly fine. But again, this was one of the major changes that the consultant proposed as part of the zoning code rewrite, and kind of thought maybe it's too major.
That's a interesting thing, in laying out a parking lot and looking at the use, and I've had a lot of owners write letters saying, for the use that we have, our tenant is such a small occupancy, we don't need 15 parking spaces, we're only going to need 6. So, we're looking for a reduction because of that, and that reflects in the occupancy. So the vast parking lots that we have for some of the grocery stores, if that tenant changes and they don't need that requirement of parking, are they going to be more apt to tear out that asphalt and put in a green space? So if you're going to do a reduction in it, and I would say, well, the tenant's going to tell you how much he's going to have. If he wanted to use that minimum requirement because he's filling up the site, but if he doesn't have to fill up the site, he can prove that he doesn't. I would say that he has to show that he has land to do it, but he doesn't have to develop it. I don't know if there's some kind of crazy thought process in there for that, because if, like the medical center we just did, that was a lot of parking for that medical center. So if they got, instead of having 4 tenants in there, they only had 1, and now they're controlling the parking, the people that are coming and going, maybe their parking to them could be less. So then, if it's less for them, they didn't have to develop that many parking spaces, but they had no choice because of our code currently. So it really, it's not 0, like you said. It's almost a rational comment of how much they need. And then we could look at that and say, well, okay, it's like detention basin. You gotta have some, if this square footage gets changed, we're gonna have to have additional parking, but you don't have to develop it at this time. I don't know how that can come into play. I'm just thinking out loud.
No, I appreciate that very much. And there's a lot of different thoughts and variables at play. I will say that one thing our code does in one area, and it's in Old Gahanna, it encourages like shared parking and that to kind of reduce that on-site parking, but it doesn't actually doesn't say you can have a shared parking agreement and that lessens your requirement. It also says, maybe more importantly, that there can be a 50% reduction by planning commission. So maybe we could kind of incorporate that language, maybe have it be not just Old Gahanna, but it be, citywide if, the developer is proposing some type of, can show, again, like that tenant analysis, that market analysis of what they need versus what the code requires. Again, if that's, even though, the history shows that when those variances are asked for, they're granted. Again, when we have those discussions with folks who are looking to come here, anything that they can kind of say, all right, there's administrative approvals or there's an ability to get this, if we can demonstrate that makes it a lot easier for them to make informed decisions and choose Gahanna. That's one reason, we get some of these medical users, they're choosing us over some places that maybe they would say it's a little bit more of a burden to go through that approval process and that. So I think there's some benefits by kind of going a different direction if we want to. But again, I have concerns about, going from 0 to 60 on this case, because I just don't know if it's right for us. But I don't want to make those decisions. I want to make sure we have those discussions here as a group.
Mr. West?
parking is only part of the issue. I think you have to look at how that developer or the operator of something is going to handle the traffic and how the traffic is going to be impacted by the parking. If you have valet parking somewhere, those people are super creative. They can park in places you didn't think they could put anything. You brought up High Banks Distillery, and they've added to that parking, but they've also parked in the blank lots or in the unpaved fields. I don't think you can reduce it to a zero need. I don't know what's needed, but it would occur to me, or I would think, that in a traffic study related to some sort of development, any development, that there should be a question saying, how will you handle peak traffic on a sold-out night? If you go up to the roundabout there, on one side you've got the barn, and on the other side you got High Banks Distillery. Both very popular restaurants. Both close at about 10, all right? But traffic up there starts to build around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, very popular. Think back when Sheetz was in town and how limited that traffic study was. Somehow I think the developer has to, with the success of High Banks Distillery, was that parking lot big enough for what they proposed to do? If they were sold out at 4:30, 5:30, 7:30, or whatever, what's the impact on the traffic with that kind of volume? I'm going back the short north. All right. I will tell you, they're a very popular restaurant there was illegally parking on ODOT property. All right. You don't want to be a naysayer. You don't want to be the negative, but it was encroachment, more than encroachment. All right. And it got to be a messy situation in there. So again, I think you got to look at traffic. How are you going to operate it? I don't think it all falls on the city, but the developer, and you wish them all the success in the world, but that success is going to create a lot of problem, and I think it should be addressed on paper up front.
Oh, appreciate it.
And I agree with what everybody has said. I hate to see a great big parking lot that's vacant 18 hours of the day.
That's what we want to avoid, but we don't want to create, like you said, like if that lot next to where they're parking, the Sheetz lot, if that was, like a contentious type of thing, and then, there's a lot of city gets in the middle and city's to blame because we don't have enough requirements and that. So it's kind of that balance of not going to zero, but not, requiring, everything when maybe it's 2 days out of the year when that parking lot's even close to being full kind of thing. So finding that balance, and perhaps it sounds like maybe the best way to do that is, if it's a more experienced developer who's done this kind of work, or this is my 9th store, they're gonna have a good idea and should be able to provide us, staff, planning commission, some level of details as to, why they can operate at less than what our code requires. We can look at language, like I said, we have something kind of in the code already, but we can kind of look at what some other zoning codes are doing for some of the amount of, like we know office just isn't the same generator for people per square foot that it was, just 5 years ago. So kind of take a look to see what some of those new, square footages are and propose something. And again, we can kind of show you what's currently in the code and what we're proposing, so we can see just how much of a change it really is. So, appreciate it.
Mr. Baker?
So, did I hear you correctly that you've looked at other cities' parking codes? Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, yes.
Okay, because, we do this all the time in my day job. We look at what other people have done. And so I don't think that we have to necessarily reinvent the wheel here, because I'm sure that, the issues that we're facing with parking here in this city, they're going to be the same over in Hilliard, down in Grove City.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, again, I think what we can do is that we can kind of go out there, do a little bit of research, and find out what these other communities are doing, and maybe try and find,
Something that might work for Gahanna. And that was sort of
Exactly.
our back and forth with the consultant over it hasn't been 7 years, but it's been hot and heavy and pretty light at times with the zoning code rewrite. But that was always sort of a concern of mine is, in a suburban community, I think, you need some level of parking. And this one's pretty easy for us to kind of take a look at some codes and take a look at that. So that's absolutely what we can do and will do and see where we're at and maybe where we need to be, and then bringing that before you all.
Another follow-up question, let's say in the past 5 years, let's pick that number, the amount of zoning variances that we've had with parking, have those primarily been commercial/industrial type?
I think it's, I'm trying to envision them, but I believe there was a couple industrial sites, a couple of maybe a medical office or two, and a couple of multi-families, maybe like 3. I think pretty much all of our multifamily requests, which 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 3 of those 4, if not all 4, asked for it. So it's multifamily. It's a little bit of the medical and some industrial.
Okay.
No retail, because we don't do retail anymore, apparently.
Yeah.
Mr. Hicks?
Thank you. Agree with everything that's been said. I would just add a comment that we don't lose sight of our current code has requirements for accessible parking. So, but we don't lose sight of, maintaining that or similar requirements.
Yes. I would see that actually. That's a good point. I was thinking about that earlier tonight, because with no parking requirements, it's, what about ADA? But that's actually handled by the building department and our engineering department and the zoning code. And really, it's an engineering and building that are tasked with enforcing ADA requirements. So it's probably actually best left to other folks to say what those calculations are, because I actually think they change, and I don't know if our code's ever been updated to reflect whatever those standards are from a space calculation standpoint. But those would still have to be identified on the plans, and we would be reviewing those. So I could see that actually going away, but it's actually handled by 2 departments. I don't think we need a third, but yeah, that's important. And we could definitely have language in there, and there might be language in there that says, like, hey, you have to meet the ADA standards. We can have it as determined by, appropriate city staff or something like that. So yes, thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
Anything else, Director Blackford?
No, I think that's it for tonight.
Very good, thank you. Move on to official reports. Mr. Roth, anything from the Assistant Attorney?
No, sir.
All right, we're going to go back to the Director of Planning.
Thank you. Real quick, just a couple of things. Really, as Director, just to officially welcome Logan Stang, newest member of our planning team. He is our planning manager. He has an excellent background, more diverse skill set than I do. He has time in the public sector and the private sector. Planning here in Dublin and planning next with Columbus. So that's great. It's great timing to have him on board. We're going through the zoning code rewrite, and he's got familiarity with public participation and zoning code in that. So I just want to welcome aboard and say thank you very much, Logan. That's it. Then if I'll just go really quickly into council liaison comments. There's a few things. One, just note that there were, I think it's been a month since we've met, but the City Council approved the 2023 Capital Improvement Plan. That's a new document that replaces our capital needs assessment. Similar but different document in the Capital Improvement Plan outlines all the major capital projects that the city has. Department of Planning actually doesn't have any. Oh darn, but our good folks at Engineering and Parks and Police, and it outlines, you know, what those asks are, what those dollars would be needed, what the time frame would be, and that. So it's a very in-depth, detailed document outlining some of the city's needs. I would encourage folks to take a look at that. And also, the Parks Department, they have a new Parks and Recreation Master Plan that was approved at the same meeting. So again, another land use plan or another plan there for the parks. And I would just point out to thank council because they approved some funding. Department of Planning and a couple other departments, we're going to get new permitting software. And so we've been working on that, I think, since December of last year, and just went through and so that's exciting. That's going to be a huge benefit to our external customers. We have permitting software. Last time I heard, only about 50% of jurisdictions have permitting software, which seems like that should be a lot higher number. We've had it for about 5 or 6 years. It hasn't evolved quite as much as the city has, so we identified that we had a need for new software. It should really help the external customer experience. We had it recommended by various contractors and that, and the software should make it easier for folks to submit online their applications, request inspections online, pay for things online as well, really reducing the amount of touch points and requirements to come in the city. That'll be rolling out. There's other departments involved. Hopefully it starts rolling out in phases with it starting around the beginning of 2024. So we're really excited about that. Thank you. Appreciate it.
What's in the hopper?
That's probably more of a Maddie question now. We got the application-wise. Yeah. What do we have? We've got. I think the.
We have parks submitted 2 applications. We have 2 parks applications.
A couple of parks applications there. I think they're sprucing up a couple of their buildings.
What?
Juicy.
Well, that would probably be, we also have a rezoning. That'll be probably the most interesting one of all. I guess it's submitted, so it's not. It would be behind the Valvoline there on Hamilton Road. There is so it'd be to the east of the Valvoline, which is off of Shagbark. Shagbark is
There's a residence back there.
There is a residence, but it was demoed, I think, around this time last year. And I think when Valvoline bought the piece of property out by Hamilton Road, it was a you got to buy them both type deal. The same gentleman, I think, owned both of those parcels. So there is a rezoning request that just completed 1 round of staff review, so it's a ways away from coming to hearing. But I think it's 14 kind of like condo units is what they're proposing. I think it's like 2.5 acres site, like 5.5.
Wasn't there an easement on the south of that Valvoline to get access to that property?
Yes. Yes, and they do show, I mean, it's a conceptual site plan with the rezoning, but they do show that access going through Valvoline, but also access off of Shagbark and that. So that might be news to people out there in YouTube land. Call Maddie if you have questions.
Thank you, Michael. Nothing from the mayor, the chair. Chair is enjoying 3.5 weeks of the new granddaughter. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, named after a Dracula character, which I did not know. It's Mina, but it's Wilhelmina. I had a criteria where all the girls' names had to end in an A, so the son fulfilled that requirement, so I will remember him in the will. Outside of that, I have no other comments. Is there any other correspondence and actions?
No, sir.
Poll members for comments. Got any comments here? Hearing none. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.